The guy was chilling when he heard someone calling him in a bad mood, saying that the Shaw family lady was already waiting at the door. He looks to the side and sees Shaw sitting on the couch in a suit, and it wasn't a stylish suit at all. It looked more like a cheap wedding cosplay. Then the grumpy old man comes in asking, "Are you deaf, kid?" The protagonist looks at himself and thinks, "What the hell am I wearing?" Next to him was Lingo Shang, the boss of Lingo Company, just observing. The man tells him to stand up and receive the guest. Out of nowhere, a system appears in his mind, like a video game HUD, and says, "You were attacked by your grandfather and are now inside the novel Crazy Marriage." Chapter 35, Good Luck. He remembers that the antagonist of this part only lasts 5 more chapters, so the mission was clear: survive. He thinks, survive 5 chapters? That could be a blessing or a curse. Before he can complain, Shaw smacks him on the head and orders, "Go welcome Miss Shaw already." With no way out, he gets up from the couch, forces a smile, and tells his grandfather he understands. The girl waves at Mr. Lingo, who waves back, but the protagonist still has no idea how much time has passed since he fell into this world. He closes his eyes and remembers how it all started. A crazy earthquake shaking the city, buildings trembling, walls cracking, a giant billboard falling. The system connected again to the Village Rebellion program. That's when the endless journey began. He started jumping from book to book, always playing the villain destined to die. If he wanted to go back, he had to endure it and earn rewards. He got some wins, but also took plenty of losses. Until one day, he ran into an overpowered protagonist, the kind of shonen character born at max level. The guy laughed and casually unleashed a massive attack, like a mix of Hadoken and Rasengan. The protagonist tried to block by raising his hand, but a huge explosion went off instantly. The fighter started spinning his arms like a maniac, trying to deflect the incoming projectiles, and even shouted at the enemy that he'd never get hit. But the opponent, dead serious in his uniform, looked ahead and replied with a strange line about a king grabbing shells with his bare hands. The soldier couldn't take it anymore and yelled that it had to stop. Then boom, a massive explosion. The guy turned around in shock, and it was over. The warrior pierced the enemy with his sword right at the edge of a hill. The protagonist thought that sometimes you run into absurdly immoral people who stab a sword through your chest without even saying hello. He closed his eyes and realized that this time he had to change. The system appeared again and warned that the novel was now 100% synchronized. The order was clear: give it everything. In front of the hotel, Shaw and several guards were waiting attentively. Shaw was also standing firm, watching everything. He thought, the part where the protagonist kidnaps the girlfriend is coming soon. At that moment, the car door opens and a girl steps out. The protagonist rushes over and offers his hand to help her out. It was Xiao Churan, the eldest daughter of the Shaw family. Beside her was Sang Huan, the protagonist of this twisted marriage romance. The guy walked next to his girlfriend with perfect anime hero posture, like there was a glow behind him. Sang, ever the gentleman, asked Xiao to go ahead and even offered to carry her bag. The protagonist remembered the role he was playing, the youngest son of the Ling family. He held a bouquet of flowers and tried to strike up a conversation with Xiao Churan, praising her enthusiastically, saying she was free like the wind. But she replied coldly, saying she was sick. The protagonist turned his head and noticed Sang Huan, the guy everyone called the Dragon King of South City. The truth was that Sang was the core of this story, a natural-born leader, the kind of character everyone respects. The problem was that she only had eyes for him. No matter what the protagonist did, carrying bags, giving flowers, devoting himself entirely to the Shaw family, there was only room for Sang in her heart, and the protagonist knew it. There were still 5 chapters left. Maybe that would be enough to shake the relationship between Xiao and Sang. After all, this romance was clearly made to please men, where the protagonist collected female conquests like rare trading cards. But everyone already knew it. This book was doomed to have a somewhat unhappy ending. All that was left was to wait for what came next. The protagonist thought, I can get beaten to within an inch of my life, but I'll hold on. He gathered his courage, turned to the girl and said he needed to say something. She froze, looked at him, took a deep breath,
and said she also had something to say. He insisted that she go first, but she already understood where the conversation was heading. The girl made it clear she would never accept this engagement, not even if her family tried to persuade her father with gifts or promises. The protagonist grew serious and said he didn't agree either, but before the tension could ease, she shot back, "I would never be with someone like you." That left Xiao in shock, staring at the protagonist as if he were looking at a ghost. That's when he said he wanted to cancel the engagement. The girl was stunned. This time she looked even more surprised than when Sang unleashed those overpowered protagonist attacks. Sang, filled with rage, shot the protagonist a deadly look and demanded to know what his plan was. Xiao didn't believe it at all, pointed a finger in his face and said it looked like a setup. The protagonist tried to calm everyone down, gesturing for them to relax, and calmly told the girl he had no second intentions. But Xiao snapped back, saying she had seen enough and would never allow herself to love. The protagonist looked at her and thought angrily, "Deep down, you just want to stay by Sang's side, and I'm here playing the role of a loyal dog." At that moment, a strange voice echoed in his mind, calling him, "Idiot girl." Xiao looked around startled, not understanding where that came from, and got even more irritated. To cut the tension, the protagonist said there was no point in overthinking and concluded that they would tell the elders they absolutely did not want this engagement. Sang shot another furious look, turned his back, and stormed off without saying a word.
Suddenly, the system appeared again and warned that there had been a bug in the interface. Now the protagonist's thoughts could be heard by the characters in the book. What a screw-up. He even thought about reporting the error, but quickly realized that if he did, he'd be formatted, basically deleted from the game. Then the system added that it was fine, the issue was already fixed, and from now on, only his complaints and comments would be recorded. The protagonist sighed in relief and remembered that in the original plot, he insulted Sang for kidnapping the wife and ended up in trouble. But now, if he wasn't engaged to Shakuran, Sang would have no reason to attack him. Simple. He just had to survive 5 more chapters. Excited by this survival mode plan, he went to the door and told his companions they had arrived. Xia asked her friend not to come in with her and stayed outside waiting. Meanwhile, Tang looked at his girlfriend with pure affection, and Xia couldn't get what the protagonist had said earlier out of her head. When the girl asked Xiang to wait outside, everyone was surprised, including the protagonist, who noticed that Sang was clearly irritated by it. Even so, he went into the living room and walked up to his grandfather, who was sitting on the couch as always, serious and in control. The protagonist introduced Shakuran to the old man, who greeted her respectfully and even told the boy to call her by her first name, without formality. Then he ordered his grandson to serve the guest a drink. Inside, the protagonist thought that he couldn't afford to get close to this girl, the most important one in the city. He needed her to break off the engagement herself. Then his role in this drama would finally be over. Meanwhile, Xia heard that strange voice connected to Lin Han again and felt offended, without understanding why the protagonist thought she should be with Sang. Chang, confident as ever, told her not to be afraid of anything, even if 10 enemies came at once. And she truly trusted him. After all, he had saved her life once. That was when the protagonist carefully brought a cup of tea to the girl. Xia, suspicious, kept thinking about what this guy really wanted with all that talk about the arena. She thought someone was spreading rumors, and the old man looked away, confused, not understanding why everyone was so tense. Xia stood up from her chair and made it clear she didn't agree with any of this. She explained to her grandfather that she felt nothing for Lin Han and that she only wanted to be engaged to someone she truly loved. The protagonist raised a finger, like an anime teacher explaining combat rules, and said that forcing an engagement would lead nowhere. Xia was left speechless. She seriously couldn't believe he was being serious. The man stepped closer, trying to apply pressure, saying that he and the girl had to get married, but the protagonist, fully determined, said that Shakuran completely refused to marry him. Kanon, shouting almost like a shonen character before a final punch, confirmed that there would be no marriage at all. Xia couldn't understand why the guy had changed so much from one day to the next. Just yesterday, he had even written a huge 5,000-word essay for her.
The protagonist firmly extended his hand, as if saying he understood the business side of things, but this wasn't going to happen. He explained that the marriage needed to be canceled and hoped the girl would stay firm and refuse for good. Shaw looked at the protagonist closely, like a curious RPG NPC. Then the girl extended her hand to him and said she understood everything. Sha, with that sly look of someone who had just uncovered an anime backstory secret, commented that the rumors about her not wanting to marry now made sense. The clever girl suddenly changed her mind, saying that feelings could arise even when they hadn't existed before. And to the protagonist's total shock, like a final episode plot twist, she agreed to the marriage. His shock was straight out of a shonen anime scene where the hero realizes the enemy was actually a friend. He felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Shang, inside his mind, warned that the girl was almost at the limit of her patience, and out loud advised Sha not to push herself too far. The protagonist, almost in battle-ready mode, thought about wanting to scare his girlfriend just to see sparks fly, and explained that all of this was just the family's and matchmakers' wishes. Sha put a hand on his shoulder and asked if he really didn't like her anymore. Of course, he confirmed that he did, but when he looked at the girl, he felt angry, almost imagining crushing her head like an over-the-top anime villain. Sha, watching, thought he was way too dramatic, and the girl figured he should really listen to her. Josare, sharp as ever, found it irresistibly tempting. Shang took the girl's hand to guide her, while the protagonist held his fiancée's hand and said they needed to talk. Shang, without looking at his uncle or grandfather, said they would stay out of it for a while. The old man smiled and let the young people go, saying they could talk freely. The protagonist rushed into the next room and asked what that was all about. Shan said there was still time to cancel the engagement. Sha asked why, and he explained that the marriage had been arranged by the families and that he couldn't simply refuse it. Shang reminded her that she herself had said she only wanted to marry someone she loved, and added that she had always treated him with disdain. The fiancé reflected and thought that no one else liked him, but maybe after the marriage everything would change. The protagonist almost lost it inside, mentally screaming that if she started to like him, he'd be completely finished. Shang wouldn't let him escape. Sha couldn't understand why his friend, a young master from one of the 4 great families, was afraid of a mere bodyguard. He angrily held out his hand and asked if she was refusing. Sha replied sharply that she would not refuse. He then asked, "So what now? What are you going to do about all this?" Riang, irritated, realized there was nothing he could do.
The banquet hall was packed with guests. A man raised his glass and shouted to celebrate the young couple's engagement. Everyone began congratulating the boy and the girl. Za and Khan stepped onto the stage, and a girl commented that the union of the Lingyo and Xiao families was basically a final boss-level alliance in any strategy anime. Zan listened carefully. Someone mentioned rumors that Xiao didn't like Lingyo. The bodyguard, glass in hand, glared angrily at the girl. The protagonist became furious, clenching his hand as if about to unleash an anime-style special attack. With full force, the glass shattered. Zan shouted at the man, extremely angry, saying he wouldn't accept that. Uncle Xiao looked at the guard curiously, trying to understand who that guy was. Zan, with a sly smile from someone who enjoys watching chaos unfold, explained that everything he said was because of his daughter. The guard asked in surprise if he really thought his daughter's marriage depended only on him. Xiao realized his friend was completely arrogant. The man on the stage, already red with anger, said he didn't want to talk anymore to a fired bodyguard and demanded someone remove him. Zan looked around and noticed 2 guards approaching. The man said it would take 10 men to hold him back, but promised everything would go the protagonist's way. Then more guards appeared. One of them, like an anime fighter charging at full speed, rushed toward Takashan. Calmly, he caught the man off guard and sent him flying back with a powerful blow. He didn't stop there. Zan finished off another fighter. The guards, shocked, realized he was no joke. One of them said they should all attack at once. Fighters came from all sides, charging straight at Zhang. Zhang just waved his hand and started fighting like he was in an anime scene. Spinning punches, heavy shoves, guards flying everywhere. The protagonist was completely stunned, unable to believe what he was seeing. It was like an episode where the hero shows up and wipes out all the enemies alone, leaving everyone speechless. The protagonist realized he could be the bodyguard's next target, but Zahn, as if watching a fight anime, clapped excitedly and told Bean that the guy was incredibly strong.
Calming down, the protagonist explained the misunderstanding to the guard. Zan smiled and reassured him, promising that Xiao Shiran would not marry him. Zan, however, remained silent, staring straight ahead, as if assassin mode were activated. The crowd murmured, surprised by the guard's courage and skill. Someone whispered that Lingyo was rich and refined, but the bodyguard had none of that. Tien stood beside the guard, watching every move of the crowd. Zan, irritated, muttered that all of this was far too treacherous. The protagonist felt lost, unable to understand what was happening in this chaotic romance. Khan thought everyone should support the protagonist and ignore the villain. Xiao looked at the bodyguard with disgust, not understanding why he hadn't chased after Xiao Shira.
Out of the corner of his eye, the protagonist noticed the guard seemed to be just observing, but was actually ready for anything. The girl sitting on the couch thought Ling Guan looked calm, but inside he was like a rabid dog ready to attack. The bodyguard said he didn't care about anyone else. What mattered was that the girl was happy and he wouldn't regret what he had done. Then he slowly walked toward her, almost in slow motion, like a dramatic anime scene. Zhang bowed and said no one would ever force her to marry. Looking at Sang Bian, it was clear he truly was a respectable gentleman. Worried, the protagonist mentally asked Sang to take care of Xiao. The girl looked at the bodyguard with irritation and said he made her nervous. The protagonist didn't understand why she looked so disgusted. Xiao looked away, somewhat repulsed by the situation, but the bodyguard remained unfazed. He stepped closer and firmly took the girl's hand, as if saying he wouldn't let anyone force her into anything. The protagonist asked nervously if he was really planning to run away. Zhang stared ahead with a look of disgust. She didn't like having Zhang by her side at all. Furious, she asked the boy why he thought she wanted to go with him. Xiao turned, glaring at the protagonist with anger and total contempt. The bodyguard was surprised when the girl pulled away from him. Zhang clenched his fist dramatically, saddened that his girlfriend had just left him hanging. Xiao decided that if she went with Zhang, Pekwin would end up becoming part of his world. She looked at the boy, thinking she had figured out his thoughts. The bodyguard called her by name, clearly irritated. Zhang took his girlfriend's hand and asked if she was afraid that Tiang would hurt her or ruin her future. Nervous, the protagonist wondered why the bodyguard was getting so close and imagined he was about to be hit. Zhang firmly said it shouldn't even cross his mind to touch the girl. Zhang, nervous, explained to the protagonist that he had misunderstood everything. The fiancé ordered the boy to step away, and the guard turned his back. She said she didn't want to see the protagonist, but forced herself to do so anyway. Zhao shouted angrily at her friend that she would never go with him. The protagonist held the girl's hand and said the Ling family would probably want revenge. Zhao looked surprised, trying to understand his expression. In the end, the girl decided to give up, unable to figure out Shang's mind. The protagonist thought her silence meant consent, but he was also terrified of the Ling family's revenge. Zhang looked at his girlfriend, gentle and attentive, thinking about how she had fallen into the trap set by the monsters around her. The bodyguard turned around in fury, staring at the protagonist with pure hatred. Zhao, frightened, realized everything was unfolding exactly like a dramatic scene from a novel.
The protagonist looked at the girl with a fierce gaze, mentally calling her a despicable woman. Sha watched in fear, thinking the girlfriend was trying way too hard to provoke him. And sure enough, the girl looked back with that look full of disgust at the furious Lin, as if saying he was seriously overreacting. The protagonist realized he had completely lost control of the situation. A man appeared from the side and shouted to Shang that he no longer needed to worry. After all, the son-in-law could only be Lin Goan. Nervously, the protagonist thought that the apple really doesn't fall far from the tree. Sha watched the man's back closely, suspecting he was using some old trick to fool everyone. The furious bodyguard told his companion that he was allowing his daughter to marry a despicable man, and asked if that man was really her father. Shang turned to the girl and said he didn't need anyone but her. Sha explained that she didn't want to go anywhere, which made the girl furious. She couldn't understand why the bodyguard couldn't grasp such a simple explanation. Shang commented that she was too shy and promised he would come back for her soon. Surprised, the protagonist asked if he was really leaving now. The bodyguard turned back and said he wasn't finished yet. He would take Kai's life if necessary. Yang pointed at the crowded hall and said everyone there was getting worked up and looking down on others.
The guard glared at the crowd and said they would all bow before him. Shan grew scared, realizing the bodyguard really was about to leave, and asked him to think carefully before going. The protagonist ran toward his rival and said he needed to find a way to escape with Shah Charan. The bodyguard replied that he would keep his word and take his girlfriend with him. Shah looked at the girl excitedly, thinking that if he took Charan now, there would be no need to come back later. She closed her eyes but couldn't hide the disgust she felt. She heard the boys arguing nearby and, exhausted, shouted for them to stop. Finally, they fell silent. Then Shah reached out, grabbed the protagonist's clothes, and pulled him close. The girl kissed him without warning. A nearby guard was left speechless by the scene. Shan almost fell backward, completely shocked by his girlfriend's unexpected kiss. She didn't even have time to say anything. Shah, with a look of disgust, told the guard to leave. After all, she only had eyes for Lin Goan. The young man grew furious and didn't want to let his girlfriend go. Shang realized the girl was completely lost, unsure how to save herself from all this chaos. Shang looked at the protagonist angrily and said he needed to destroy the Ling company. The protagonist was nearly paralyzed with shock when he heard that from the bodyguard. At that moment, the system jumped in, congratulating the protagonist for completing a task. Chao Turan would help him survive the next 5 chapters. As a reward, he received a lakeside village with 600 square meters of land to complete the mission. The protagonist dropped to his knees, happy as if he had 9 zeros in his bank account. He didn't even need a house anymore. He threw himself onto the bed in his new place, a glass in hand, thinking he finally had a bit of peace. Kang thought the old man's birthday party was over, and the protagonist got a few days off. Kan closed his eyes, satisfied. The system, excited, announced that the second part of the story would begin that day. According to the plot, Shay and Lingwen were about to be forced into an arranged marriage. Shay invited the newlyweds to a banquet. The host was the general manager of D, a man named Tang Shui. An uncle of Shay Chuan was already old and sick, and of course, many people wanted to curry favor with Tang Shui. Lingwen also wanted his support. The protagonist, like a true RPG hero, offered an incredible doctor to take care of the old man and brought him along. Chan made waves at the banquet, successfully obtaining a copy of the sacred healing scripture. Shang Biwan's miraculous hands left Tan Shu stunned. It was practically a live medical miracle. Suddenly, the old man stood up from his wheelchair and declared himself cured. The poor protagonist was deeply disappointed. Because of this miracle, Lingwen lost the Ye family's greatest supporter, which ultimately led to his downfall. The old man even demanded that Dan Zhao never see his son-in-law. Khan and the old man were horrified by the order, and the protagonist, in an irritated voice, could only think that today was definitely the perfect day for a banquet full of chaos and intrigue. He felt uneasy realizing that Sang Biwan had already mastered the sacred scriptures. Basically, he knew he was in for a serious beating. The system simply reminded him not to forget the mission. He had to go back and survive. End of story. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a stranger rushed in, calling for C. The man shouted that the old man was hosting a banquet today, and that he needed to hurry. The protagonist, excited, barely had time to react when Ryang appeared before him. The system issued its classic warning, "Beware of Ryanga, the king of provocation." He looked at the visitor and thought he needed to get rid of this guy. Tian, noticing his concern, placed a hand on his shoulder and said he didn't need to worry about the bodyguard. Ryang, who was heading to the United States to work as a stockbroker for the Lingwen family, grabbed his bags and left. The protagonist gave him an encouraging push forward. "Believe in yourself. You are the best." Ryang barely managed to get on the plane, still shocked, and from the ground, the protagonist raised his hand and shouted, "You're the best!" Seeing the scene, Tian felt a sense of inner peace, like finishing a one-piece marathon after a stretch of intense episodes.
With Rao finally out of the way, the protagonist realized the banquet was about to begin. People started arriving, climbing the stairs of the family hotel. A car stopped, and an elegant man stepped out and headed toward the entrance. Kian straightened himself and decided to call Turan, letting her know he had arrived. He remembered that they were already engaged and that he could call her Vurong. When the girl got out of the car, she asked why he seemed so familiar.
The formally dressed guest walked slowly toward Kyung. The girl touched the protagonist, and suddenly the memories came rushing back. She remembered him. Just then, the guest appeared, grabbed the protagonist by the tie, and angrily said she was his ex. The protagonist looked at the red-haired woman in surprise. She was Mao Kui Kui. At that moment, the pieces of the plot began to fall into place in his mind. At that point, Ma Kui, who had been Ling Gohan's classmate in college, entered the story. They had gotten along well before, but broke up because of a misunderstanding. After that, Ki became friends with Shu Han and completely cut ties with Ma. She watched Ling Gohan in silence, trying to understand what he was doing. Furious, Ma Kui said she had already forgotten him and that it had been a long time since they last saw each other. Ling Gohan felt upset because he didn't like dealing with an ex. Then, without noticing, he realized he could hear her voice in his head, but when he turned around, she was gone. She grew irritated with no idea where he was hiding. Meanwhile, Ki went to ask the price of something near the car, and the protagonist thought someone else had shown up. Even from far away, he could still hear her voice. He even asked if the guy wanted a light. Even the dog nearby looked at Ma, thinking she was pretty, but even so, she wasn't sent to the arena. Not so fast, my dear anime hero. The protagonist sighed, thinking that first the ex was gone, and now the fiancé too. Ma shouted angrily to herself, finally able to hear everything clearly. She walked up to the guy and firmly asked what nonsense he was talking about. The startled dog tried to explain himself. Ma got even angrier because Ling Gohan denied everything. She remembered he was trying to win over Shu Shiran, and it only ended up irritating her, making her think that if he didn't like girls like Shu Shiran, he probably would have liked Ma more. She realized he had no idea she was hearing everything, so Ma asked him directly why he got upset when Shu Shiran was mentioned. In the end, she asked the question no one had dared to ask before. Did you really want to get married? The protagonist reflected that marriage was a real trap, thinking about all the risks he had been facing. Mao, curious and confused, wondered why he still remained so loyal to Shu Shiran despite all the chaos. He, in turn, was irritated with himself for being stuck in this role of forced loyalty to Shu Shiran. After analyzing the situation, Shu Shiran realized that Kyung's hatred because of X had reached extreme levels, and that he would probably send the girl away without hesitation. Mao laughed lightly at the irony, finding the situation amusing without fully understanding why.
The protagonist's girlfriend stepped forward and tried to calm things down, reminding everyone that the misunderstanding was not his fault. Ma also tried to apologize, explaining that she would be getting married soon and that he did not need to feel bad. The dog nearby perked up, remembering better times, while the protagonist hugged Ma and reflected that she really was much better than Chacharan. At that moment, a car stopped abruptly and a new girl stepped out. She was shocked to hear the protagonist say that Ma was better than her. Cha, irritated, glared at him angrily while standing beside the red-haired Tien, and the atmosphere grew heavy. Chiron, also upset, slowly called the protagonist's name. She approached him and shot him a furious look, making her anger clear. Ka, distracted, stepped away to talk to his girlfriend, unaware that Cha was getting closer and closer, determined to prove she was smarter than everyone else. Suddenly, Chiron ran up to the protagonist, beaming, saying she had been looking for him for a long time and leaving him completely stunned. Cha fell silent for a moment, staring at him with a mix of desire and expectation. She hugged him, calling him her fiancé, while Cha, in shock, put her hands on his face. Without warning, Cha hugged him as well and kissed him, leaving she wide-eyed. The protagonist could barely understand the sudden shift in the girl's attitude. Ma, keeping her composure, realized that her opponent had used some kind of strategic trick and thought to herself that they would talk about it at the banquet. Later, the girl showed him her phone, confirming that her number had not changed, and calmly walked aside. Cha turned around, watching the protagonist closely, while the unhappy girlfriend reached out and grabbed him, making it clear she still wanted control of the situation. Cha was furious, scolding the protagonist for being married and still going out with other women. Jang noticed the confusion and reminded Ma that she was behaving poorly, stressing that there was no one nearby to hear them. The protagonist just wanted to escape the pressure and said he did not want to get married. Cha, irritated, explained that it was impossible to cancel the engagement in front of everyone. Ka asked his girlfriend why she did not follow her true love. Cha replied that she believed her true love would be the person she herself had chosen. The girl tried to show her displeasure with sharp gestures, while the guard approached from behind, watching and realizing that she seemed sad. Cha grew tense, still arguing with her friend, as the guard reflected that Khan had already captured Cha, yet he was still running around with other women. Jang clenched his fists, understanding that it was his duty to protect Charon. The guard grew angry, thinking about revealing Ka's true nature so Charon would see the truth.
The protagonist, equally annoyed, only wanted the girl to stop bothering him in public. Sha, meanwhile, showed that the engagement meant nothing special to her. Han noticed that the girl was furious and unable to calm down. The protagonist decided they would talk about the divorce later, and Kei thought that Songbong would certainly show up at some point to resolve the situation. During the argument, the protagonist decided to step away from his girlfriend. At that moment, Kainito warned that someone was calling for her and wanted to leave. Sha turned around, clearly dissatisfied, feeling that the boy was rejecting her. Then a man approached and greeted the protagonist, surprising him by revealing that he was his uncle, accompanied by an elderly gentleman. The man explained that he had prepared a gift for the protagonist's uncle and gestured to the side, introducing Dr. Shangguan. The old man adjusted his glasses and greeted the protagonist with a familiar smile. Xiao was also surprised, feeling that the man seemed familiar. The man whispered to the protagonist that he could bring Dr. Shangguan to treat Tong, strengthening the alliance between the Tong, Sha, and Lingo families. The protagonist grew anxious, trembling, and suggested that they should stop before going any further. He tried to confirm the doctor's name, afraid he had misunderstood. According to the original story, the doctor he had translated as the sick old man was Shangguan. Kei had brought the miracle doctor to Mr. Tong, but Song had accused him of being a fraud. The protagonist realized that he had distanced himself from Roy precisely to avoid encountering a miracle doctor. Yet now the doctor had appeared anyway. Kei thought bitterly that the plan would not be so easy to change, and the protagonist reflected that even with changes to the book's events, the main point of the story would remain the same. The man placed a hand on the protagonist's shoulder, noticing that he was frozen, and suggested that a doctor accompany him. The protagonist explained that he had a stomachache and needed to go to the bathroom, running off at full speed while shouting for the doctor to wait. Meanwhile, the man stepped out onto the banquet hall terrace, calmly raising a glass of wine and observing the chaos unfolding below. The dog, lost in thought, realized that everything around him had changed a great deal. A girl approached and noticed that the protagonist was sighing. Sensing his concern about Xiao Ran, she reached out to him, suggesting that he was not compatible with Xiao Yam. The protagonist, noticing the gesture, took her hand, knowing that in the future she would end up becoming Shang Kei's lover. On the other hand, he looked at the girl and made it clear to himself that he already had a girlfriend. He reflected that in this kind of story, one could not touch beautiful women. They all seemed to be standing in the male protagonist's arena.
Seeing the situation, Ma mentally suggested that the engagement could be canceled, leaving the protagonist worried, since he knew it would not be that simple. He understood it as a test of will. He stood up, trying to restrain himself, still wondering why he felt attracted to a girl with a curvy body and a slim waist. Ma was surprised to realize that he was thinking about her that way. She placed her hands on the protagonist's shoulders, wanting to understand who he truly liked. He replied that he only liked his fiancée, trying to remain firm. The dog, meanwhile, was anxious, barely able to handle the situation. The girl touched the protagonist's ear, reminding him that he still had not answered properly. Startled and nervous, he decided that he had endured enough and needed to act with dignity. Ma noticed that he was saying one thing while trying to convey something completely different and laughed cheerfully. The protagonist, surprised, was still shy, trying to make sense of the situation. Looking around, he noticed Sambuan approaching. The protagonist gently pushed Ma aside, thinking that even if he were engaged for a day, she would still be just a passerby to him. He reflected with disappointment that he had already sent the girl away and could not stand the situation anymore. Even standing there, he felt that he should only be an observer. He could look, but not touch.
Ma, on the other hand, found everything cute and laughed at him. He grew displeased, questioning internally whether she really took nothing seriously. The protagonist glared at her angrily, but Ma only laughed, recalling something funny, while he decided it was time to leave as quickly as possible. He turned to go, and his girlfriend looked at him in surprise. The dog opened the bedroom door, preparing to enter, and the protagonist heard a noise. Ma was sitting on the floor with her leg twisted, explaining to herself that she had fallen. He froze, frightened, trying to understand whether she was okay. Kay looked at Ma closely, surprised to realize that she was the heroine of a romance. The event director was also watching the hall attentively. Kay noticed that Sambuan was watching him from afar. Ma reached out her hand to the protagonist, reminding herself that she had not helped him yet, leaving the scene full of tension, expectation, and the feeling that something big was still to come. The girl cleverly realized that she could make the protagonist fall in love with her, while he, attentive, noticed that she was wearing high heels and thought that no one would judge him if she tripped. He felt that he had made a mistake. He could not hurt Ma in any way. He also feared that the girl might get angry and complain to Sang, and realized he would be in trouble if Sambuan wanted to take revenge for her. Because of that, the protagonist decided to turn his back on his girlfriend, trying to keep the situation under control. Ma, visibly displeased, made it clear that if he did not help her, she would be furious, and that the consequences could be serious. Frightened by her intensity, he tried to calm her as quickly as possible. He supported Ma, advising her to be more careful as she clung to him, reinforcing that he would never allow Beijo to become his lover.
Worried, he asked whether it would be necessary to call a doctor, and Can, accompanying Mal, decided to help her out of the situation. Mal, with a mischievous touch, reminded the protagonist that he was already holding her by the waist, leaving him excited and nervous, barely able to control himself. He felt her touch up close. At that moment, Shang appeared from behind. Suddenly, Shang approached the protagonist and placed a hand on his shoulder, catching him off guard. Baek-shan appeared behind him, and Shang grabbed Mal in his arms, shouting at the protagonist that he was useless. Mal turned toward the man in disgust, not understanding who he was. Shang then explained that he had deceived Mal into getting engaged to the protagonist, accusing him of harassing innocent girls. The protagonist was shocked, unable to understand who was actually angry. The banquet guests turned their attention to the commotion. Mal, trying to control the situation, ordered everyone to stop arguing, while Shang made it clear that he was not fighting with the protagonist, only condemning him. Tang, angrily, reinforced that the girl definitely needed to find out about the protagonist's actions. Meanwhile, a man approached from behind and placed his hands on the shoulders of two guests, questioning them about their connection to his younger sister. Mao Xiao looked at Shang with anger and confusion, while Ken watched the boys in front of him with enthusiasm, trying to remember who they were. The protagonist reflected on the situation and realized that Shang and John had conspired together. Mao was the daughter of the family's eldest son, while John was the youngest son. Both, according to family tradition, competed to help their parents manage the business. Shang and John had known each other for a long time, and when the dispute over the inheritance began, they reached a secret agreement. Shang had made John persuade Kay's father to invest large sums of money in a risky project called Mars Photovoltaics, even though the project was doomed to fail. Before the protagonist realized it, all of Kay's uncle's assets would be transferred to his father, but Bei-John had plans of his own. When Kay's father's investment failed, Shang stepped in, gaining the trust of the family's daughter, and Mal eventually became one of his lovers. Reflecting on everything, she realized that both of them were bastards, and it became clear that Mal was frightened. She had not expected John to appear there. John gently held the girl, asking how she felt. Mal looked at her brother with fear and distrust, remembering that all of this was his fault. She recalled that her father had invested a great deal of money in the Mars photovoltaic project. Mal was unsteady, and John made sure she did not fall. Leaning on him, she said she felt dizzy and needed to sit down. She held a glass of wine, still confused about how the protagonist had discovered everything. She finally sat down, while the protagonist thought about Lingo Wuhan and decided to take care of her in secret.
Mao, for her part, became convinced that he had not forgotten and that this felt like true love to her. Chang, furious, approached the protagonist, accusing him of intimidating Madame Ma. Excited, the girl shouted for him to wait and asked the guard to let him go, stating that he was a true gentleman. She explained that she was only trying to find out the truth and still did not know exactly what was going on. Zhang looked at her angrily but said nothing, and the protagonist fearfully realized that they hated him again. Mao then asked for help, saying her leg hurt and that she needed to be carried. The protagonist was startled, but realized she did not want him to call anyone else. She made it clear that if he refused, she would scream and accuse him of harassing her. The girl shot a mischievous look at her friend, and the dog, displeased, thought that she was extremely ruthless. Mao prepared to leave, telling her brother that she would deal with him after discovering the whole truth. June was surprised, immediately understanding what she meant. In the living room, the protagonist placed a hand on Madame Ma's shoulder, helping her sit down. She finally settled into the chair, trying to compose herself. The protagonist knelt beside her, thinking that as soon as he got out of there, he would run away as fast as possible. With a sly smile, the girl realized he would have no chance to escape. Mao stretched out her legs and discreetly asked him to massage them, adjusting her clothes slightly to be more comfortable. Worried about interfering, the protagonist knew that if he acted wrongly, Sam might deeply hate him. Mao moved even closer, saying it was just a massage, but made it clear that if he refused, she would start screaming. She began a countdown with her fingers, showing 3, then 2, signaling it was time to call the others. Can, watching, agreed, and placed a hand on Madame Ma's leg, suggesting it was time to begin. The protagonist gently held the girl's leg and removed her shoes to make her more comfortable, asking if she was in pain. Madame Ma said she needed a bit more massage. He reflected that Can really had talent for this. Meanwhile, Zhang watched the scene from the street, lit a match, and handed it to Chan, who commented that his sister was not paying attention to him and wondered what he should do. June looked at his companion, took a drag from his cigarette, and remarked that Mao only respected strong, powerful men. He asked whether she and the protagonist knew each other well. The man remembered that Lin was already engaged and recalled past encounters with the girl. Trying to ease the tension, June said he needed to go to the bathroom, while Zhang remained alone under the tent light, silently watching him walk away. He stared ahead angrily, thinking that all the women around the protagonist would eventually end up in his hands. At that moment, a man approached and, after a pause, greeted Chant, keeping the tension in the air. The man looked at the protagonist in surprise and thought that this was his uncle's miracle doctor. Later, he asked questions about Tanara, while Sand reminded his companion that they were all one family. Chant, excited, thought it was the perfect moment to subdue the Zhao, Mao, and Tan families.
Meanwhile, the guests in the hall began to stir. Someone shouted that the grandfather had collapsed, and everyone rushed to the master's room. Tan, already late at night, panicked and shouted for his grandfather to wake up. The man assessed his relative's condition and commented that the situation was not good at all. He asked Dr. Shang Wan if he knew what to do, and the doctor, watching closely, said he knew exactly what needed to be done. Shang first thought about checking the old man's pulse, while Shand, dissatisfied, believed the doctor was a fraud and that Lin would not live much longer. The boy ran to his grandfather in distress, shouting that the old man had woken up, recalling that they had consulted many doctors without success. Excited, he asked friends and family for help, assuring them that the Tan family would not forget their generosity. Someone turned to a friend, asking him to resolve the situation and help the head of the Tan family. Tiang, thinking the man beside him was an idiot, decided he would not help. It seemed like a bad idea to have such a debtor, but after reflecting, Chang decided he could allow his favor to be used one more time. Beige, in turn, explained that he was still not completely certain about the patient, but estimated at least a 50% chance of success. June was pleased, trusted his partner, and placed a hand on his shoulder, promising that if the patient were cured, no one would forget the effort. Without wasting time, the boy took Shang by the hand and followed him. Beijum suddenly stopped his companion, explaining that there was no need to rush and that they could wait for the right moment. June looked at the old man and reflected on whether it really had been the Xiao family that brought such a skilled doctor. He was hopeful that Shang Wan, the famous physician, could cure Grandpa Tan. Shang calmly explained that alone he might not succeed, but together they would have a chance. Everyone around watched with respect, impressed by June and the protagonist's presence.
June reflected on the situation and told his companion that there was truth in his words, happily celebrating that they had thought everything through. A guest held Shangwan's hand and mentioned that a miraculous doctor was there. Yang placed a hand on the old man's shoulder, explaining that the Xiao family had recommended that miracle doctor. The man looked at his companions with joy, showing confidence and satisfaction. The doctor, also pleased, announced that he would now examine the patient. A man discreetly approached, coughed softly and caught the doctor's attention, silencing him and pointing toward the protagonist. The dog, worried, prepared to flee, not understanding why everyone was talking about him. Meanwhile, the man approached the grandfather and placed a hand over his, reassuring him and explaining that Shangwan was considered the reincarnation of the great ancient physician Xuano. The protagonist was startled and surprised by the amount of trust placed on the older brother.
Shangguan placed his hand on the patient's pulse and began examining him carefully. With confidence, he stated that the illness could be cured and explained that he would use the family's celestial silkworm imperial needle. Tang, however, thought the doctor's method was complete nonsense, comparing a divine needle to treating black pox. Shangguan, confident, held a sheet of instructions and tossed it aside, focusing entirely on the patient. The doctor asked young Master Ling Ku to assist him, leaving the protagonist surprised, as a girl beside him also showed surprise. Shangguan asked for the young man's help, and he replied nervously that he had not studied medicine, growing angry and confused about why the doctor wanted to involve him. The doctor adjusted his glasses, praising the young master's modesty and remarking that he still planned to hide his talent from everyone. Shangguan explained that the protagonist possessed an innate talent for healing, smiling brightly. The protagonist, displeased, realized that Shangguan was observing every movement around him, staying alert. The doctor then ordered him to disinfect the area and hand over the needle as he approached the patient and explained the treatment. He described that headaches were caused by injuries to the neck and back, and that acupuncture points needed to be chosen carefully, balancing energy and restoring the flow of yang. Shangguan stood beside the patient, instructing the protagonist on which points to use, while Sang watched in silence. The protagonist remained quiet, absorbing every instruction without responding. Suddenly, Sang commented that the doctor had followed the correct sequence, but still lacked skill and knowledge. Baijin, furious, showed his dissatisfaction, unable even to look at the doctor. Shangguan, serious, pointed at the protagonist and questioned internally who he thought he was. The doctor then asked Mr. Tang to expel that man from the room, gesturing for Shangguan to leave. Chang sternly explained that the protagonist was the only person there who could truly save the grandfather, and that if he were expelled, the old man would lose all hope of recovery. The doctor, irritated, stated that the protagonist was personally the only chance to save Grandpa Tang. The protagonist was stirred by the responsibility and realized that a conflict was about to begin. Z, excited, thought it was time to place a bet, while Mao looked at the girl. Confused about what that meant, the doctor pointed at the protagonist, indicating that he could discuss and learn the acupuncture technique being used. Z agreed, giving his approval. Shangguan explained that the young man only needed to apply another needle injection, and already knew the technique well, but for that he would have to kneel before the doctor. Suddenly, the doctor remembered something and demanded that Tang also bow before young Master Ling Ku. Chang glared at him, unsure of what to do, while the protagonist watched attentively, slightly frightened. The dog reached out anxiously, wanting to stop the doctor, but Chang, furious, said that both he and the protagonist would have to kneel at the master's feet.
The young man was terrified, feeling like a complete loser. He knew from the story's script that Shang Betsun knew the details of the bloodshed, something the doctor ignored, and he realized that this ignorance could be a strategic advantage. With tears in his eyes, the protagonist thought that he really would have to kneel before his opponent. Meanwhile, both girls were lost in their thoughts, mentally arguing over the bloodshed at Dark Point. One of them firmly decided that she would not let Shang Betsun go unpunished, determined to make him pay for his actions. The doctor carefully held the needle and guided it toward the patient's head, mentally explaining that he was administering the final injection. The old man regained consciousness and looked ahead with a weak, almost relieved expression. The child nearby beamed, shouting that Grandpa could finally get up. Feeling the relief, the old man looked at the doctor and acknowledged his skill, realizing the headache was gone and his chest no longer burned. The excited girl told the protagonist that the doctor was truly amazing. Khan, attentive, recalled from the book that Tan's grandfather used to vomit blood and realized that Sang would soon have a chance to prove his worth. Suddenly, the old man felt unwell again, clutching his mouth convulsively and beginning to vomit blood. The man beside him panicked and asked what was happening, while Shang, with a satisfied smile, told everyone that no one had believed him before. Badon pointed at the doctor and accused him of being nothing but a fraud, leaving the boy terrified as he begged Sang to help his father quickly. Shang harshly criticized the doctor, reminding everyone that many people had paid dearly for trusting an imposter. He pointed at the protagonist, saying they had trusted villains. Suddenly, Banan stepped forward and declared that he had changed his mind and no longer wanted the boy and the doctor to kneel before him. Shang, however, still demanded that Han and the doctor clean his shoes until they shine, leaving the two girls in disbelief. Ma shouted for her friend to stop, and the two held hands in silence. Sang was irritated because the protagonist was talking to his ex-girlfriend. Xiao watched everything out of the corner of his eye, and Badan One, looking at the girl, explained that the protagonist did not deserve that situation. Shang gestured insistently, arguing that the protagonist was only being punished because of her, claiming that Han was always caught between two girls and needed to be put in his place. Mao, displeased, clearly stated that she did not need him, leaving Badan completely shocked. Xiao then wanted to understand what technique the protagonist and the doctor had used when they cured another patient similar to Tanya's grandfather. She excitedly explained that it was a technique called local bloodletting, a final secret technique the doctor had decided to use at that moment. The girl believed the protagonist knew everything, but stayed silent, merely observing and reinforcing to others that she had seen Shangguan cure the patient.
The doctor mentally explained that vomiting blood was a normal reaction and that after the bloodletting, everything would be fine. Shang, excited, realized that everyone around was finally understanding the situation. The protagonist asked the doctor if everything would be okay, and Shangguan, raising a test tube, mentally assured him that it would. Suddenly, the patient's eyes shined brightly, and a surge of strength coursed through his body. The old man seemed to radiate energy, feeling rejuvenated and full of vitality. He cried out in amazement, realizing he had regained his youth. All his senses were sharpened, and his body overflowed with energy. Grateful, he rushed to the doctor, promising that the Tan family would be eternally thankful for his help. Shang, watching the scene, became deeply unhappy, unable to understand how the doctor had discovered his secret technique. Furious, Shangguan turned to him and reminded him that every loser should kneel before young Master Lingo. He shoved Shang from behind, demanding that he keep his word and bow. Shang was terrified and anxious about the demand. The reward tally was about to begin, and the protagonist was still trying to process everything that had happened. Surprised to have survived, Xiao and Ma were left wide-eyed, not understanding where he had gone. Suddenly, space began to distort. Lingo opened his eyes and realized he was entering the system's reality. The protagonist passed through a portal and fell into another dimension, kind of a mini isekai crossover, just without dragons yet. He woke up in a small room beside a sofa with a transparent golden mesh behind him, the system indicating that he could rest for 3 days before the next mission. Extremely thirsty, he grabbed a glass of water and drank like someone in an extreme survival episode. Then he sat down and asked the system how many points he had earned. The answer was 100 points, bringing his total to 233. He complained, calling the system stingy for so much humiliation and so few points, but the electronic assistant assured him that the calculation was perfect and that he could relax. The system explained that the number of points depended on his skill, the task, and his performance. The boy asked how long it would be before he could return to his original world. The system replied that his travel channel had been created after a billboard fell in the original world, and that he would need to exchange points for a resurrection item to return.
The protagonist clapped excitedly and immediately asked how many points were needed for the exchange. The system ran the calculations while the boy looked out the window and determined that he would need 80,088 points for the resurrection item, but his current points were still far from enough.
He still couldn't exchange the item. Irritated, the protagonist threw a punch and hurled a pillow at the system window. Lingu, meanwhile, collapsed onto the couch, completely desperate. The protagonist started doing the math and realized he would need to complete 8,000 tasks just to have a chance of going back. And on top of that, after every mission, he would have to rest for 3 days. Lingu became absorbed in the calculations, muttering that it would be better to simply die. The system tried to encourage the protagonist, reminding him that there was still plenty of time and that if he completed the tasks well, the rewards would keep increasing. Even so, the boy collapsed onto the bed, exhausted, devastated by the situation, afraid that everything might fall apart, and with no desire to be resurrected. 3 days later, he was alone in the Lingu family's living room, his eyes tired and unfocused. After a pause, he suddenly closed his eyes as the teleportation process began. Lingu was taken to a parallel reality where an extremely bright light appeared in front of him. As soon as he arrived, he felt pain and dizziness in his head, barely able to keep his balance. Unknown warriors surrounded him. One of them ran after him, shouting to alert everyone. An unfamiliar fighter pointed at the frightened protagonist. He explained that Kan was disappearing right before their eyes and that his heart had been shattered by love, blaming the victim's entire family. The protagonist angrily shouted for the stranger not to come any closer, but the system informed him that the full text of the novel had been synchronized. His story was now recorded, and he needed to deal with it before even thinking about going home. The protagonist had to complete the task quickly and with a high score. According to the script he was reading, the beloved of Niing's villain was supposed to get married that day. The boy thought, somewhat sadly, that they were about to witness a typical melodrama full of tears and betrayal. But at the last minute, the Su family decided to adopt a different son-in-law. And guess who was chosen? Yes, the protagonist. The warrior beside him clutched his chest and shouted Niing's name in anguish. Uncle Lingguang placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, saying in a distressed voice that Kan had offered her loyal heart only for it to be torn apart. The protagonist's cousin, Lingguan, stepped forward and firmly suggested that they kill Niing right there. The father, speaking more sensibly, told the second brother to discipline his son properly, making it clear that killing someone was not the solution. Priest Fen, deep in thought, commented that the Su and Lingu families had been united for a long time and that their union should be celebrated. Chan stepped forward, grumbling that the Su family had been the first to break the agreement, so there was no reason to cling to old feelings.
One of the relatives said that if the Su family did not value friendship, there was no reason to maintain any ties with them. The protagonist grew worried at those words. Looking around, he realized that his relatives had no idea that the Su family would soon become the leading force in Tianchuan's commercial circle, capable of making all merchants bow. He understood that his family had decided to cut ties with him out of sheer ignorance. Lingu thought for a moment and decided that the boy would make a good boyfriend for Nim. The protagonist realized that if he kept behaving the way he was, sooner or later he would end up becoming a villain. The men exchanged surprised looks, and one of them decided to listen carefully, trying to believe what was happening. The protagonist then looked at Tien and Fen and enthusiastically invited them to sit down. Fen sat on a small bench and with a smile said that everyone should take a seat. Chen suggested to the others that they speak politely. Tien, confused and excited, didn't understand anything. Calmly, the protagonist asked the relatives to forget all resentment and wish 100 years of happiness to the newlyweds. Tien, still shocked, asked whether he was really serious. Without needing to fake strength or a smile, Lingu proudly told the others that he himself was power incarnate. The protagonist stepped away and told the relatives that it was already late and time to sleep. In silence, he decided that he needed to escape as soon as possible. Tien was surprised by his brother's words, while Fen remained quiet at his side, just observing. Tien realized that somehow he had just heard the thoughts of Kei's brother. Chen then turned around and left, sternly telling the family that they were free to go. He too was surprised at having heard his son's thoughts. The protagonist entered the room and collapsed onto the bed, finally able to rest.
Lingu looked around in disbelief, thinking that everything was wrong. The boy noticed that the system was silent that day. He called out to the system and to his sister, but no one responded. Everything around him felt meaningless. Suddenly, an angry woman appeared beside him, grabbing his clothes and reminding him that the teacher had been waiting for him in the room for half an hour. Tien, speaking in an annoyed tone, complained that he didn't want to be dragged anywhere. He saw himself as superior, proud to be the second young master of the Lingu clan, and believed he didn't need to study. Qin, more sensible, explained that he was already an adult and needed to learn at least a bit of the sage's wisdom so others wouldn't mock him. Tien ignored her and turned his back, refusing to read. Kay, furious, called the boy by name in frustration. Meanwhile, the protagonist slept deeply and motionless in his bed. Someone suddenly knocked on the door, demanding that he open it. Half asleep, he asked who was waking him up and complained, feeling as if someone had dug up his ancestors' graves.
Tian ran forward and shoved his brother, shouting that they shared the same ancestors, but the protagonist was still sleepy and confused. Lingu approached the bed and suddenly collapsed unconscious. In a weak voice, Tian asked if everything was really true, telling the protagonist about the rumors surrounding him. The boy opened his eyes abruptly and stared ahead. He remembered the second young master of the Lingu clan, who had always been spoiled and after the clan's downfall, died miserably, drowned by scientists he once despised. Lingu looked at the visitor with disgust, and the protagonist thought that his relative would meet a miserable fate with no chance of rescue. He said goodbye, saying he was going to sleep and that Tian could go his own way. Tian then announced that there would be no more parties and that he had decided to study. Lingu stared at his brother in shock, filled with disgust and confusion. Tian turned around and shouted loudly, causing all the scholars to admire him and kneel before him. Watching from the side, Lingu concluded that his brother was probably sick. It was a clear day, and the protagonist lay on the bed, confused as to why the system was giving him no instructions. He turned to the side and, somewhat irritated, decided that he would have to look for guidance on his own, even knowing that the system might consider it laziness and deduct points. Suddenly, a young servant entered the room and said that his family had sent an invitation. The protagonist stood up and asked where the invitation was. The servant explained that a young woman from the Blue family had delivered it, inviting everyone to dinner at the Drunken and Simmerant. He added that if the protagonist refused to go, the messenger would be sent back. The protagonist was confused, unsure which of the young women wanted to go with him. The servant admitted he didn't know either. Lingu turned and said he would handle everything himself. Curious, the protagonist went to the estate gates to see who had come. There, he saw a girl but couldn't tell who she was. He greeted her, trying to learn more. Lingu stood just behind him watching. The red-haired girl turned toward him, and the protagonist stared at her, trying to make sense of the situation. She watched him closely. She and Lingu exchanged looks and recognized each other. The girl stopped in front of the protagonist, glaring at him angrily. Lingu turned and said it wasn't him, but the girl saw through his act and confronted him about his nervousness. Lingu smiled at the guest and reminded her that she had brought an invitation to the Drunken and Simmerant. The protagonist, surprised, wasn't sure if that was really possible. The girl pulled her hand back in disgust and asked why he was acting as if he didn't know her. It wasn't their first meeting, but now she decided to play along.
The protagonist smiled and explained that last time he had only exchanged a few words with her, nothing more. Ever since that encounter, everything in his life had seemed to turn upside down. The girl took his hand and cheerfully said it was all just a coincidence. She glanced at the boy's green robe and commented with disdain that it didn't suit him that day. Startled, the protagonist realized that Maukukuyo was standing right in front of him and even remembered his previous outfit, thinking about how everything felt confusing and funny at the same time. Excited, he stopped near the doors and began calling out to the system for help. Then he noticed something strange. Maukukuyo was actually the protagonist of another novel. He couldn't understand how she had appeared there. He looked at her with discomfort, realizing he was in serious trouble. Mao glared at him fiercely and said bitterly that she hadn't married Sul's childhood friend and was now completely lost. The protagonist grew afraid and anxious, unsure of what to say. Suddenly, he lunged forward and covered the girl's mouth. She struggled and tried to speak, but he sternly warned her not to say a single word there, reminding her that she was in his house. She pulled her hand away angrily and asked if he had really decided to keep a lover at home. At that moment, a woman entered the courtyard and was surprised to see the protagonist. Mao shouted, asking the woman to be more understanding while she was in pain and discomfort. Inside the residence, the protagonist's mother, Wang, was with Fan. Fan, shocked, asked whether he had just gone blind or deaf. Smiling, she explained that the man had just embraced Mao Kukuyo, the cousin of Miss Su, in her own home. Curious, the man asked when his son had managed to get a wife. Fan, excited, said she had figured it out on her own. Fan, disgusted, disapproved of the protagonist appearing with a girl in broad daylight. Fan reminded him that Mao was still single and that there was no need to enter the bedroom of the protagonist and his girlfriend. Fan asked with displeasure what exactly she was offering. Someone near the gate suggested that they wait for the girl to leave before discussing everything behind closed doors. Suddenly, a young girl named Tin ran over, shouting that something bad had happened. Frightened, she explained that Tian had run off to see the teacher and decided to get his books to study and pass the exams. This left both the woman and the man extremely surprised. The teacher entered Tian Yu's room where Tian was unrolling a scroll ready to share the great teaching he had learned. The old man stopped in front of him, holding a massive scroll. Tian remembered something and found himself unable to tell his companion about the path of the great teaching.
The Shang concubine named Shel Ta Hong appeared at the window and said, dissatisfied, that nothing could be learned from someone so naive. She closed her eyes, thoughtful and displeased, concluding that Tian was only pretending to be a diligent student to deceive his mother and get money. The protagonist entered the room with Ma and closed the door behind him. Ling Gu, deeply shaken, asked how she had become his cousin. Ma sat on a bench and explained that a sudden light had flashed during the banquet. She lost consciousness, and when she woke up, she rejected the marriage in this world. Ling Gu paced back and forth in frustration, unable to understand how a character from another book could sneak into this one with official authorization. Ma asked cheerfully whether the protagonist had really jumped in front of the gate on purpose to receive her invitation, since he still hadn't lost hope. Ling Gu replied to his classmate with disgust, saying that no one had the right to take away the main character's marriage. Ma looked at him with the same disgust, reminding him that in the last book he had behaved completely differently. Ling Gu grew frightened and uneasy, realizing that the girl had just revealed his past story. Surprised, the protagonist asked again which book she was talking about. Then he realized with excitement that the girl herself was aware she was a character in a book. Ma looked at him mischievously and said sternly that she had heard everything. Curious, the protagonist asked how she had managed to hear it. She laughed maliciously, enjoying his confusion, stepped closer, and touched his face with her finger, saying she could hear all of his silent inner mockery. The protagonist sadly recalled all the adventures from the previous book. Ling Gu grew scared, thinking Ma was playing a trick on him. The girl tilted her head, looked at him with mischief, and laughed happily to herself. She moved closer and told the protagonist she wasn't joking. Ling Gu looked at her in admiration, impressed by her smile. Ma slyly asked whether he liked her smile that much. Startled, the boy covered his mouth, realizing she could hear his thoughts, probably because of his unfaithful boss. Ma discreetly closed her eyes and decided that if the boy was so worried, she would let things go his way. She pinched the protagonist in displeasure and asked what he was doing there, whether he had really dragged her there just to stand around staring at her. The protagonist didn't like her words and grabbed her hand, asking her to stop playing around. Ma, angry, asked why he had accused her of being rude the last time they met at the Tan family hotel. The protagonist calmed and let go of her hand. The girl stepped closer and called the protagonist by name. She was wearing an elegant blouse and asked with interest whether it was enough for him to look to see how attractive she was. Ma shot him a playful glance and suggested he try. In a cheerful voice, the protagonist said he would now show the true unity of knowledge and action. Ma watched him closely, waiting to see what he would do.